Coming up on the Whitney Reynolds Show, we are talking mental health this week, specifically suicide. Ways to prevent this terrible action from taking more lives, that's coming up. The Whitney Reynolds Show is supported by the Respiratory Health Association, raising funds and awareness for lung disease research and programs. Suicide takes the lives of thousands per year and even took the life of one of my favorite actors, Robin Williams. It is a problem we are hearing more and more about, however, typically after another life has been lost. You're watching The Whitney Reynolds Show. Dr. Edmond Yomtoob is a mental health professional that knows a lot about this topic. Both personally and professionally, he has dealt with suicide and is here to tell us more. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
You know, so many times we hear suicide after the fact. Right. And today's show is so important because it's all about prevention. All about prevention, yes. So tell us a little bit about suicide. It's not a condition by any means, but it's someone that's suicidal. Is that a condition?
Well, I'm not sure if calling it a condition or not calling it a condition is important or not. What we know about suicide is it is an effect of serious mental health problems. And we can call those mental health problems conditions, something like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, substance abuse. So there are diagnoses that lead to suicide or to suicidality. And quite frankly, what we're learning more and more is that mental health can be fatal like any other physical problem.
One thing I've been learning through this season of the show is we've covered a lot of topics that people are almost embarrassed to talk about. They do feel like, I gotta stay in the dark about this. This is not normal. And we've kind of been in a society that says you're gonna be fine, you're gonna be okay, but suicide is taking lives.
Suicide is taking lives. It does feel like we're at a tipping point, though. I could say generationally, if we talk to people who were walking around 50 years ago, they'd never talk about depression. They would hide it. We are talking more and more about depression, both with adults and with children. Children are pretty sophisticated. They know that there are mental health problems going on. They see their family, they see their parents, they see their peers struggling with some kind of mental health problem. And it's stripping away the stigma in terms of getting help. So they know that a kid in the room may not be struggling with something like depression, or maybe they know that a kid in the room is struggling with depression, but they know that there are other mental health problems, and it's taking away the shame. And people are more and more accepting of just the different variations that we have in people.
Is depression one of the leading causes? Is that when it comes to mental health and suicide?
Sure. When we talk about depression, we know that 70 to 90% of the people who die by suicide are struggling with some mental health problem. Usually it's undertreated or untreated, and usually that mental health problem is depression. So that is one of the areas we really focus on. Suicide prevention and depression awareness are one and the same.
Is this something that you think in the schools going forward, this would be talked about more and more?
I don't think it, I know it. It is a part of people's young children and adolescents' health curriculums. There is an awareness that we need to talk about it so that even young people can access help if they're struggling or if they know somebody who's struggling.
And there's all sorts of hotlines out there, but how effective are those?
The hotlines are amazingly effective. The hotline that is probably the most important one, or the best known one, is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. The number there is 1-800-273-TALK. If you don't have numbers on your phone, it's 1-800-273-8255. It's an important number that everybody should know, whether they're suicidal or not. If you don't remember the number, Google the word suicide, and it comes up as a banner, because the folks at Google have recognized that when people Google the word suicide, they might be trying to access means. And they are aware enough to say, we need to prevent this problem. So the first thing that comes up is the hotline number, which is amazing.
That is amazing.
It is really
amazing.
amazing.
That is really great. And the hotline counselors, are they the ones that pick up the phone, or is it just volunteers?
There are volunteers across the country. There is a special outreach on the Suicide Prevention Hotline for veterans. So if you are a veteran, if you're struggling, I think you press 1, just listen to the prompts, it'll get you there, so that veterans can speak to other veterans and talk about their mental health problems.
So there's different prompts on there, and people just can talk. And
yeah, there's a special way to reach somebody
Wow.
if you're a veteran. Yeah,
that is wonderful. So now going back to suicide, this became a very personal thing for you. Tell us about your story.
well, I'd say that it is a very personal story. About 25 years ago, my mother died by suicide. In retrospect, I realized that she'd been struggling with depression on and off her entire life. And the aftermath was probably one of the most difficult things I've ever experienced. One of the things I learned about that, though, is that people aren't aware of what they're capable of doing until after they've done it. I'll tell you that there were times in my grief that I didn't think I'd survive. I thought that I would die of sadness, die of isolation. And I've come to realize that people are amazingly resilient. It's that sadness and that isolation that I think the person who is struggling with suicide feels, and it somehow gets transferred to the people grieving. But people are amazingly resilient. We need to send that message not only to people grieving a death, but we need to send that message to people who are struggling with serious mental health problems and struggling with suicidality themselves. Is, we are resilient. We might need a helping hand. I got a helping hand after my mother died. And now I'm very proud to be a part of an organization that helps people across the country. And I have to be honest with you, the work that I've done with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has probably been some of the most meaningful work I've ever done in my life. And it's stuff that I do as a mental health professional, but I don't get paid for it. And I'm very proud of the fact, and I keep going back to do more, despite the fact that I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I've had experiences, I've met some of the most gracious people who are all working really, really hard to make sure that suicide affects as few people as possible. There's a saying in the suicide prevention community is imagine a world without suicide. And I know people who are across the country are working amazingly hard and who are transcending their own grief in a really beautiful way.
To make sure that happens, or to ensure that more...
To bring us closer to a place where there's a world without suicide.
Is that why you got into the field? Is because of the loss of your mother?
Why I got into mental health? I think not only because of her loss. Growing up with mental health problems in your family affects the way you see the world. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that shaped me.
Amazing. Well, thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for coming on and telling your story. I mean, that has to be an inspiration, across the board, because even you, in the sadness of losing your mom, had to talk and had to open up, had to get through.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Our next guest is an executive board member for the Illinois chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. She joined this organization in hopes to spread awareness for suicide prevention to help save lives. She lost her daughter to suicide back in 2007. Welcome to the show, Kara.
Thank you.
I know it must be tough to share your daughter's story and your personal story, but this is something that is saving lives by opening up about your journey.
I certainly hope so.
So take us back to 2007. Your daughter was 18.
Right.
Was there any warning signs that you saw?
She had been treated for about 4 years for depression. She was seeing a psychiatrist. Off and on, she had seen other mental health professionals at various times, psychiatric social workers, different psychiatrists, psychologists. But she was what I would call a high-functioning depressive. She was doing well in school, getting into colleges, getting scholarships. She was having some issues, but I didn't know what the signs were for suicide. I certainly knew she wasn't particularly happy at times, was very unhappy at times, but a lot of that I wrote off to teenage angst, and I'm not sure that I knew the difference. Sometimes those two seem to kind of confound. In retrospect, of course, you learn a lot more after the fact, and you say, aha, well, that might have been one sign in this. But I honestly believe that everything kind of came together one very bad night in a bad way. And if there had been something hadn't happened that did, one of the many things that happened that night, maybe that wouldn't have occurred, and maybe she would have died later on. I don't know.
Did you ever say to her the question that the doctor mentioned earlier, do you ever want to take your life? Or did her counselor ever say that?
I don't know, because of, by that point she was 18 years old. I don't know what went on in her counseling sessions. And frankly, even when she was younger, those are pretty much confidential. I mean, obviously as a parent, I had the right, and I did speak with her counselors after each session, but at no point was I told that she was suicidal. In fact, during the several months leading to her death, her psychiatrist kept giving her meds, but had sent her to, I would call her a behavioral therapist, somebody to work with cognitive therapy. And in other words, the message I was getting was that she was really doing pretty well. And so, again, my thought at that point was that somebody who would die by suicide is somebody who is absolutely at the nadir of their ability to function. And in fact, I've learned that's not true at all. Since my daughter died, I've met hundreds of people and talked with hundreds of people about death of either a child or other loved ones by suicide. And I've had the opportunity to actually interview for a book project I'm doing lots of people. And yes, some people are bottomed out, and some people, everybody's very surprised that they're the ones who have taken their lives. So we have a lot to learn.
So going back to your daughter's life and the journey that you've been on, what would you say to moms that have a child that are having similar, I know we touched on that, but what would you say your strongest message would be to moms and dads out there?
Well, to moms and dads of people who are teenagers and young people, and unfortunately suicide is one of the leading causes of death for young people. I would say just be available, which I was, but it's so hard to get through to that age. They want to establish their independence. And I guess what I would say is, if you feel like there may be something wrong, there may really be something wrong. And even though as a parent you want to see everything that happens with your child in the best possible light, unfortunately, if you're an optimistic person like me, you have to kind of put that to the side and be as skeptical and as, I guess, non-emotional about it as possible. And that's where turning to an independent third person, a healthcare professional who is appropriate, unlike maybe my daughters, but who is appropriate, would be a good step, because I don't know that parents can ever truly see their children the way that an objective third party could.
One thought that comes to mind when we're doing the show is someone might be watching that is thinking about taking their life. And so we're talking a lot about prevention, but let's just say someone's watching today that might feel like taking their life. People don't always think of the aftermath of the people they leave behind. What has this done to you personally?
Well, before I address that, I just would like to say that for my daughter, I know that she talked about wanting to have children. She talked about going to school. She talked about being an aunt to her sister's children, and none of those things are going to happen. So her loss, her whole life, she lost her life. And, that's, her loss is the biggest loss. The loss to the rest of us is incalculable. It's, at first, I was just, I went to work like within 2.5 weeks after, because that was something I knew. But everything else about my life was something I didn't know. It's as if you've been hit by a Mack truck and everything you think you know has changed. My relationships with members of my family were impacted. My relationships with friends were impacted, sometimes for the better. People really came forward, but I lost friendships because of it. I know that my daughter's friends were devastated. I mean, they were young people, and some of them dropped out momentarily, for a while from school. It really had a profound impact on the community.
Yeah, it impacts a ton of people.
It's like you throw a stone in the water, and the ripples just keep going out and out and out. And there are so many people affected by one death by suicide. Everyone's life matters. Everyone is important. And people may feel that they're not very isolated, that they don't know how they can go on. And that is exactly the point at which you need to reach out and let someone help you. There are people who are there and trained to surround you with the support you need.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and telling your tough story. And thank you for now helping others by serving on the executive chapter of the board. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's now time for our social sizzle. And this week we have Illinois Senator Michael Hastings from Tinely Park. He is here to tell us about the legislation he is sponsoring that focuses on youth suicide awareness and prevention. He joins us now via Skype from Springfield. Welcome to the show.
Whitney, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you're in Springfield joining us on our suicide prevention show. This is a tough topic.
Yeah, it's a topic no one really wants to talk about. It's sort of taboo in the community, but it's so important to talk about it and bring awareness to this. It's a sad, sad thing that happens in our communities.
It's something that you don't talk about till after it happens, so to be preventative is really a good thing. And you're actually working to pass legislation on this. Tell us about what you're working on.
So we wrote Senate Bill 1793, which it dictates to the Illinois State Board of Education that you have to create a model suicide awareness and prevention policy for schools to adopt across the state of Illinois. And so far, it's passed out of the Senate unanimously, and it's made it through the House committees, and it'll be on the floor for a vote here in the next week. So I think it's going to go very well.
So what would this look like if you could paint a picture of what, if this passes, what it would look like in the schools?
So the policy itself, I'm not an education expert, but I can tell you that there are experts out there that create policy. So what we did is, in the legislation itself, we've got a whole bunch of groups together to sort of have a collaborative approach to what a model awareness and prevention policy should look like. And I could tell you those groups include educators, people who are in suicide awareness and prevention groups, parents, and a whole bunch of other people.
So what was the backbone behind getting this moving?
So one of my constituents, actually, I knew him. I grew up 3 doors down. They're a great family. They have 3 children, and one day their daughter unexpectedly just committed suicide. They are awesome parents. They're so awesome that one of them's a deputy police chief and the mom is a nurse in one of our hospitals. You just don't notice signs sometimes. And I think no matter how great of a parent you are, sometimes you miss it.
So the curriculum that could be going into schools is more like opening kids up to talk about it, because that's one thing you hear a lot of the time, like with suicide, is we had no idea. But then if you peel it back, maybe one of their classmates did, or maybe a sign on the internet. So is that kind of what this is going to look like in the schools?
Yeah, so it's a collaborative approach. So students, teachers, administrators, a lot of people aren't trained in terms of what are the signs of suicide. Are they depressed? Are they having hard times in school? Do they come to school with a different attitude? Those signs are missed sometimes, and this policy would go ahead and mandate the schools to develop a policy and train their teachers at least 2 hours every year of suicide awareness and prevention. And I think it's a great thing, because if you can catch just one and save just one life, it's worth it.
You're absolutely right. Are there any other states that are already doing this type of curriculum?
So we modeled this policy off of the state of Pennsylvania. The state of Pennsylvania had the suicide organizations there. They had developed a policy. We modeled it off of that. We tweaked it a little bit to make sure that we can get a lot of people involved. And I think we found a happy medium, and I anticipate its passage. And I can tell you, I'll be urging the governor to sign this bill.
Right. So in case someone's watching outside of Illinois, or our viewers are all over, what would you say if they're in a state that does not have any type of thing like this in place?
So I think the best part about our country is the fact that we have a democracy. So I served overseas in the Middle East. I know what it's like under a dictatorship. And the best part about our country is that you can call your legislator. You can say, hey, this is my idea. This is the state. These are the states that have passed it. You should model the policy off of that. And I think legislators would be open to this policy, because I think majority, I would venture to say all of them value human life, and they value youth and the promise that they have for our country. So I would just urge them, call your senator, call your state rep, and tell them, hey, get to work.
Well, thank you so much for coming on this show and spreading awareness for suicide prevention.
Whitney, you're awesome. You have an awesome show, and thanks for doing this, and hopefully we can save more lives in the future.
Thank you. Earlier in the show, we talked about the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and now we are going to find out more and how we all can get involved. Welcome to the show, Lisette.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us about the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and kind of what your mission is.
Well, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is the largest nonprofit dedicating to funding research into suicide prevention, and then they take the information from that research and develop programs for those who have survived suicide loss and also those who are struggling with mental health issues.
So what kind of research goes on? Because it sounds like there are so many different cases that you guys can study. So what kind of research are you doing?
Some of the researchers that I've read about are looking into brain chemistry, and also there's others that are looking into effective treatment programs and effective therapies and things like that.
So here in Illinois, how many people are you servicing?
We have over 6,500 volunteers here in Illinois.
Okay, so 6,500 volunteers, and then basically the general community that you impact is all of Chicagoland.
Well, the whole state, actually.
Oh, the whole state.
Right, yeah.
Okay, great. So you're really making an impact. What is your biggest fundraiser per year? Is it the walk?
Yes, we have Out of the Darkness community walks throughout the state, but the biggest one in Illinois and nationwide for AFSP is the Chicagoland Walk, and that's held in the fall every year.
So what does the walk look like? What does that mean? What does it symbolize? What is the walk all about?
Well, it's an opportunity to get together with those who have also lost someone to suicide, or perhaps if you've struggled and you have some personal experience, to get together with people who have a similar experience. And really, it's a very healing event. It's a very large event, the Chicagoland Walk. It's on the south end of Grant Park, and it's just a very moving experience in addition to raising funds for the research.
And so when this walk happens, do you have stories that come out, like people with the stories that come out and tell them, or is it a walk? Like what kind of happens that day?
Yeah, we do have speakers who share their personal stories, and then throughout the walk there's different areas where you can do something meaningful with your experience, share why you walk, or make something as a tribute to the one that you lost, and then the walkers go down Lakeshore Drive.
And then, so all the money that you raise throughout the year goes back towards the research and then also comforting the families that are impacted?
Correct, right. So then we have programs that were developed through the research that affect the families that were impacted, right.
Well, that is wonderful. Where can people find out more about the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention?
Sure. Our website is afspil.org, and then if you wanted to register for the walk or volunteer at the walk, that would be chicagowalk.org.
And they also happen all around the nation, so they can find their
Right.
local chapter and how to get involved. Okay, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Suicide is a word that no one wants to hear, but when you put the word prevention after it, you realize there is so much hope. No matter what you are going through in life, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes we cannot see it on our end, and we must seek help to get there. If you or someone you know is battling with depression and have thoughts of suicide, please call 1-800-273-TALK. For more information on today's show, visit whitneyreynolds.com. The Whitney Reynolds Show is supported by the Respiratory Health Association, raising funds and awareness for lung disease research and programs.